Alvaro, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, James. I appreciate having
Sure.
me here.
You're the first grower of cannabis in Colombia, the first licensed grower, correct?
Well, we're one of the first. We certainly worked very hard at the third quarter of last year to get one of the first licenses for cultivation and extraction of high and low THC.
Okay, so this is for medical purposes only?
Yes, it's only for medical, only extracts,
Okay.
which is the way the Colombian regulation
Oh, only
works.
extracts, no
Yes.
bud.
No bud, as you can imagine.
Pobre Colombianos.
Well, I think the government just wanted to make sure that we could separate all this illegal aspect with this new industry. And that's why they did it as extracts only.
Interesting. And so what's the population of Colombia?
50 million almost.
50 million. So that's bigger than the Canadian market, bigger than the California market.
It's you have 80 companies here in Canada competing for 35 million people on a market that's 20 billion. I'm talking about Colombia with right now a few players, 50 million people. We did our own study. We found there's about 6 million patients that are consuming products for opiate-based medication for chronic pain, epilepsy, PTSD. By itself, it's a fantastic market.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So how did Colombia come to embrace the concept of legalized medical marijuana?
I think there's a couple of factors on that. I would say 2 years ago the government started looking at this regulation because, as you know, the world was starting to evolve and the commodity prices were dropped down, oil price, all of this. And so the government is looking for another way to generate a new industry, to generate more income as the oil prices come down. So how do we create an industry? How to create new companies coming in and more investment? So the medical cannabis thing comes from two aspects, I would say. First is that in Colombia, Latin America in general, all of this medication opiate base is extremely expensive. And it also could create a health problem like the United States. So that's one aspect. And the other one is the world is evolving. Colombia also wants to shed those images of 25 years ago.
Sure.
Narcos. The Netflix shows of Narcos 1, season 1 and 2 and 3.
Right.
They want to shed that reputation, start looking at a very medical side. And I think that's the reason why they started doing this. And they came up with a very interesting and very transparent and very advanced regulation. Because in Colombia, regulation allows you to cultivate, extract, export, and domestic sales, all in one licensing process.
Wow.
So it was very exciting. I think the government took some time to really evaluate how to make it work.
Sure.
So we actually started from the law. So the Congress actually approved a law to make medical cannabis legal.
Wow.
And from then on, the government just started working on the regulations.
Wow. Okay. So the cannabis cost of cultivating cannabis in Colombia, boy, that's almost a tongue twister, is probably very low, I would think, because you have pretty much the same amount of daylight all throughout the year.
Yeah. So I mean, regularly, Colombia is one of the biggest countries of cut flower exports, and also coffee and plantains and all of this, because we have the 12-hour sunlight. We are near the equator, so it's always the same weather. It just says whether it rains or it doesn't rain.
Right.
And that makes it, in terms of when you're cultivating, much cheaper to produce because you don't have to simulate conditions like you have to do in Canada. Because you have the weather, you have lots of water, the labor is cheap, but also because we are only in an extract business. All these high cost of trimming the flower that you have in Canada because you're selling the bud, that also sort of goes away because you're only selling the extract. So it's a very good low cost advantage, but also couple that with a very high population. So it's a very good, interesting business to be in.
Yeah, you bet. So is there ambition on Khiron's part to do exports?
Well, our ambition is to first dominate the Latin American market. Latin America is 620 million people. Colombia has the right reputation in terms of the medical community, so we have a very high level 4 World Health Organization, FDA. That means that everything that Colombia sort of approves, it gets rubber stamped in the rest of the countries. So it's not only because of the low cost, but just the reputation of the medical community. And Mexico, Argentina, Peru, Chile, Brazil, all of these countries are now starting to regulate medical cannabis. Mexico and Argentina, about only 2 months ago, passed law to legalize the extracts for medical cannabis. So my goal is to be able to position the company as a dominant player in that region because we understand the culture. We know I've been doing business in Latin America all my life. And being Colombian and being from the region and being able to be a Canadian company as well, which is Khiron incorporated here in Toronto, sort of bridges that level of trust when we talk to governors and presidents and start talking about how we can implement our business there. So Latin America, I think, is going to be our first and foremost market.
So all of Latin America will be smoking Colombian gold soon enough?
Well, with not smoking it, but certainly
Oh,
trying
right,
on oils.
right, of course, not smoking it. Okay, well, and so Khiron itself is publicly traded in Canada?
It's going to be publicly traded. We just announced our RTO deal with Adent. That's our shell. We just announced our third round of financing on the pre-going public. We raised $11 million. We were hoping for 6, so it's very successful for us, almost double. And the idea is to go public by the end of this quarter in the TSX.V.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's great. We're going to follow with interest. Thanks so much for your time today.
No, thank you so much, James. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.